Okay, our next question is for Dave. You can start with this one. And this is from Scott Barry. And he's interested to know Dave's opinion of emerging technology in training. I am thinking in particular of training with power using Stryd and monitoring recovery by measuring heart rate variability with devices such as Whoop. So there's two devices I've never heard of. So I don't know what you have.
Okay, I'm assuming this is a 3-hour podcast, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, good. Right, I've got my feet in both camps here, and through my running career, it has kind of fluctuated where I've gone with this. I must admit, I like a good gizmo. I actually quite enjoy data, as you know, John. I'm a bit of a spreadsheet fiend myself. I do love all that kind of stuff. And it does tell me a lot. And as a coach, the vast majority of my athletes I coach remotely. So having data is actually really important to go alongside the kind of written feedback. So I've got that side of me, and also I do use use technology myself in training, but only at certain times, which I'll kind of come on to in a minute. But then there's also the problem that we have with trail running, and particularly when we get into mountain trail running, the variables that are going on under us and around us are so vast. There's so many different variables that are going to have impact on the kind of metrics that we're using from the technology, that you can't kind of get a sort of a level playing field, literally. So I'm kind of torn between these two things. So if you think about when you're training, and I think particularly when you're racing, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about power meters like Stryd, or whether we're talking about heart rate, or whether we're talking about even like perceived rate of exertion from within yourself, your own intrinsic feedback. You've got all these things like, what is it, muddy underfoot? Is it rocky underfoot? Are you going uphill? Are you going downhill? Is it technical? Have you got pre-race nerves? Big impact on heart rate. Are you properly hydrated? Big impact on heart rate. Blah, 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 blah. There's all these things going on. And if you're going to use the technology, you've got to kind of add all those variables into it. And that makes it very difficult, particularly when you're on the fly in the middle of a race or in the middle of a training session. So my number one thing with my athletes, and I'm sure Eddie will back me up on this, and probably any coach in the country will back me up on this. The hardest sessions to get your athletes to do well are the recovery runs, zone 1, and your kind of aerobic base runs. And I don't want to generalize too much here, but men in groups running together, you can basically kiss that goodbye if it's supposed to be a recovery run, because we're just going to speed up too much and run too hard. So I personally use technology with my athletes. Number one priority is to make sure that they're doing recovery runs slow enough, whether that's by pace if they're on even terrain, whether that's by heart rate if they're not on even terrain. None of my athletes use Stryd. I don't use it myself, but I do know about it. So you could use your power readings to keep you slow enough to make it recovery. My first heart rate monitor was from John Kynaston. And I'd been doing this however many, like decade ago or whatever it was. And I've been doing my recovery runs for decades. I've been doing this game for 40 years. And I got a heart rate monitor. And I thought, well, okay, I roughly worked out what my recovery heart rate run should be. So I ran it to that. And it was like a 4-mile run. And it took me like something like 8 minutes slower than I would normally do. So I've been doing my recovery runs way too fast for like 30 years. So we can use our technology in that way. And I think that is probably the most important way of using them. It has got a place, I think, when you're trying to do kind of lactate threshold, speed endurance, steady state runs. I think a lot of athletes, when they start, as soon as it becomes a rep, some kind of interval training, they try and do it all at kind of 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 effort. Whereas in fact, some of those we don't want to push that hard, because the length of the session is too long, and we want to kind of maintain the correct effort throughout. So there is a place for it there. When it comes to racing, maybe this is my own personal experience, but I find that my pre-race nerves and so on, I can basically ignore what my heart rate's doing for the first like 2 hours. I don't even settle in. I'm still too excited. And so I find that I kind of ignore all of that, and I've become much more, I'm going to run as I feel. And you're going to go through bad patches in races, and you could go through a bad patch in the first 2 hours of a race, and all those metrics are going to be out and you feel rubbish. But if you can just get through it, then you are going to get through it and you'll be back in the game. And if you start worrying about those metrics all the time, it's just going to add more and more stress onto what you're doing. So I think we've got to be careful as to how we use technology. Don't get me wrong, I love coming back from a VO2 max session and looking what kind of life is left in the old dog. And looking at that, what can I get my heart rate up? But I enjoy doing that after, but when I'm doing the session, I'm not necessarily following it to that nth degree. With regard to the power meters, you're going to get potentially a better consistent reading, because some of those variables we've talked about have slightly less impact with the power reading. However, if you're going to run a race or do a long training run, running to power, it's very different to cycling because of the kind of the pounding and the variations in the underfoot conditions that we get with trail running. So essentially, you're going to have to come up with a kind of power target for that, a power target for running uphill, a power target for hiking uphill, a power target for running downhill on easy terrain, a power target for running downhill on technical terrain, a power target for running flat on technical terrain, and so on and so on. And it becomes a little bit more, isn't that just another one more thing to worry about when you've got plenty of other things to worry about? So yes, there's certainly a place for that, and you've just got to take into account all those other variables. It's not as easy as using the power meter to train for a road marathon. This is a different ball game completely. The same goes with the Whoop, which is an app or sort of program that tracks. It's largely used for things like recovery and when are you going to be at your best to do your best training, and have you recovered properly from the previous session. A lot of watches do this, but I think Whoop takes it to an nth degree. I believe it's a subscription thing as well, so that you might want to consider that. And my takeaway thought, having looked at this, was it's all very well a piece of technology telling you that you're now recovered really well from that, you should do this, or you haven't yet recovered from that and therefore you should only do this. But you've got to fit that around your lifestyle. And if that day happens to be the day when you've been given the go ahead, right, okay, you can have the morning and go out running, then that's the morning you've got to go out and do a long run. So again, the technology is maybe there to help you, but it's going to be quite difficult fitting it around your lifestyle, which is perhaps for most of us, that's going to be less. You can play around with it less than you can if you're not working. Then you can do a lot more with it.
Great.
Does that?
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm trying to keep that. I've got notes here. I've got serious notes here, but I'm trying to keep that short and sweet. Yeah,
no, that's really helpful, and I'm sure Scott, that's answered some of his questions.
What does anything about the getting your athletes to run slow enough?
Yeah, so exactly. I totally agree. So, and personally, the heart rate, I mean, ultra running is all about learning to run with feel. And right from the onset, I'm all about, how do you feel? Do you feel recovered? Do you feel tired? Is this an effort you can maintain? You don't, because like you said in a race, I never wear my heart rate monitor strap in a race. One, it chaffs like hell, and two, I don't want to look at my heart rate because I know it's going to be through the roof to start off with. So it's no reflection on anything, and I don't want to be looking at my watch, and I very rarely look at my watch. So yeah, wearing the heart rate for recovery, and it's something I'm really focusing on at the moment, and I'm so bad at it that I'm really trying to keep that strict heart rate, and I'm wearing it, and when I'm running with mates, I'm going slower. Or it takes a knock to the ego, doesn't it, to go, I'm going slower because this is too fast for me, and you're already going quite slow for my recovery pace. But it's all about thinking about the next step. Tomorrow I want to be running easy. The next day I really want to do those sessions, and it's those key sessions that are going to make you faster. So I think heart rate's place as an ultra runner is really truly in recovery. And it's so useful for cross training as well, because you can then, when you're cross training, you're not thinking, is this any good? Is this helping my running? You can relate your heart rates across the sport. I don't really need it for hard efforts personally, because I can't even look at my watch if I'm doing a hard effort. But like you, I like to look at it afterwards, and it's so useful for us for the feedback as coaches as well. The other stuff, don't have a clue, couldn't care less. Too much too much stuff, too much information, don't have time, got 3 kids.
Well, I had to look up and see I knew what Stryd was, but I had to have a good bit of research this afternoon as to exactly how it works. And that's not something I'm going to encourage any of my athletes to work with.
But if anyone's used it and it's worked and they like it, dis-moi, tell me all about it.